I still remember the nights when my grandma would sit me by the fireplace, her wrinkled hands knitting quietly as she shared stories of our small town's haunted past. One story, in particular, chilled me to the bone, the story of Sarah Reed. Grandma always told it with a somber tone, her eyes distant, as though she had lived through the terror herself. "This was no ordinary ghost tale," she would say, her voice low and serious. "Sarah Reed wasn't just a spirit. She was a vengeful one. The men who crossed her path never returned, and to this day her voice echoes through the streets of our town, calling out to her next victim." The town in question was Ash Hollow, a quiet, close-knit community nestled deep in the forests of northern Maine. Its streets were lined with old Victorian houses, some abandoned, others with stories older than the people living in them. And every year, during the Fall Harvest Festival, there were whispers about Sarah Reed. No one dared speak her name aloud during the celebrations, fearing they might summon her. Growing up in Ash Hollow, I had always heard about Sarah Reed's curse, but I never believed it. That changed when I was 16. It was the fall of 1998, and the Harvest Festival was in full swing. The town square was lit up with orange and yellow lanterns, booths filled with food, and the sound of laughter echoed through the streets. I was there with my best friends, Luke and Travis, both of whom were just as skeptical of the legend as I had been. The festival always marked the start of a 2-week celebration with parades, games, and dances. But it also marked something darker, the time when Sarah was said to roam the streets at night, searching for her next victim. "You really think Sarah Reed is real?" Luke had asked, laughing as we walked down Main Street. "I mean, come on, if she were, half the men in town would have disappeared by now." "I don't know, man," Travis said, his voice lower. "My uncle swears he saw something a few years back, said he heard her calling his name, but he didn't look back." I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but there was an uneasiness in the air that night, something I couldn't shake. We'd heard the stories countless times, how Sarah had been wronged by the men of the town long ago, and how she returned each year to exact her revenge. According to legend, Sarah Reed had lived in Ash Hollow during the 1800s. She was a beautiful, kind-hearted woman who fell in love with a man who had promised to marry her. But on the night of their wedding, the man left her, humiliated and broken. Heartbroken, Sarah took her own life. But that wasn't the end. Her spirit returned, fueled by anger and betrayal, seeking revenge on the men who had wronged her. Since then, every year during the festival, she appeared, calling out the names of men who resembled her lost lover, and once you answered her call, you were never seen again. The only defense? The townspeople had come up with a phrase, "Sarah, come tomorrow." It was a desperate plea, meant to delay her wrath for just one more night. But even that wasn't always enough. That night, after the festival had ended and the streets emptied, the three of us found ourselves walking home together. The town was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant rustle of leaves in the cool autumn breeze. We passed the old Ash Hollow Cemetery, the place where Sarah was said to be buried, and Travis stopped suddenly. "You guys ever wonder if the stories are true?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Luke snorted. "You're not really scared, are you?" "It's just a story, man." I chuckled, trying to lighten the mood, but the darkened cemetery loomed behind us, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward us. I felt a strange chill crawl up my spine, but I shook it off. "Let's just get home," I said. "It's late." But as we started to walk again, something strange happened. The air seemed to grow colder, and the wind picked up, carrying with it a soft, distant sound. "Luke." We froze in place. The voice was unmistakable. A woman's voice, soft and eerie, drifting through the night air. It sounded as though it had come from the cemetery, but when we turned to look, there was nothing there but darkness. "Did you hear that?" Travis whispered, his eyes wide with fear. "Shut up, man," Luke said, though his voice wasn't as confident as before. "It's just the wind." But then the voice came again, this time louder. "Travis?" My heart pounded in my chest. The sound of my own name whispered through the night, sending a wave of terror through me. "Guys," I stammered, trying to keep calm. "Let's just go." We began to walk faster, but the voice followed us, growing louder with each step. "Luke, Travis, come to me." Luke's face was pale now, and Travis's hands were trembling. We all broke into a run, racing through the empty streets, But the voice didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, as though it was right behind us. Finally, we reached my house, slamming the door behind us, panting and wide-eyed. "What the hell was that?" Luke gasped, pacing around the living room. "It was her," Travis said, his voice shaking. "It was Sarah Reed. She's real." I didn't want to believe it, but the terror I had felt was undeniable. That voice, it had called to us, to each of us, as if it knew who we were. We spent the rest of the night in my house, too afraid to leave. None of us spoke much, and the silence was heavy, filled with the unspoken fear that we had been marked. The next day, we tried to convince ourselves that it had all been in our heads, that it had just been a prank or our imaginations running wild. But deep down, we knew the truth. Sarah Reed was real, and she had called our names. The days that followed were tense. Every evening, as the festival continued, we avoided the dark streets and stayed indoors, but the unease lingered. The voice hadn't returned, but the fear that it could, at any moment, kept us on edge. And then, on the final night of the festival, something happened that none of us could have predicted. Luke went missing. The night Luke vanished was etched into my memory with horrifying clarity. It was the final night of the Harvest Festival, and Ash Hollow was alive with laughter and celebration. But for Travis and me, an ominous cloud hung over us, a constant reminder of what had happened just days before. We had all agreed to stick together, but the energy of the festival was too strong, and Luke had insisted on joining some friends at the main square. "I'll be back before midnight," he promised, flashing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. We watched him disappear into the crowd, our unease simmering just beneath the surface. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter grew louder, masking the tension we felt. The flickering lights seemed to dim as the final fireworks lit up the sky. But when the last spark faded, an unsettling silence enveloped the town. "Where's Luke?" I asked, glancing around nervously. It was past midnight, and a cold fear gripped my heart. "He should have been back by now," Travis said, his brow furrowing. We decided to head toward the square, our hearts pounding with dread. The streets were eerily quiet, as if the town itself was holding its breath. We approached the main square, now abandoned, the booths empty, and the air thick with a palpable tension. "Luke!" I called out, my voice echoing into the darkness. There was no answer. Panic began to swell in my chest. "We need to check the cemetery," I said, the words tasting bitter. Deep down, I feared the truth. We made our way to the old cemetery, the moon casting an eerie glow over the gravestones. The wind rustled the leaves, creating ghostly whispers that filled the air. As we entered, a chill crept down my spine. This was where it all began. "Luke!" Travis shouted again, desperation creeping into his voice. We walked deeper into the cemetery, the darkness swallowing us whole. Then from the shadows we heard it, a soft, melodic whisper. "Travis, come to me." My heart raced. It was Sarah Reed's voice, echoing through the night like a siren's call. "Do you hear that?" I said, barely able to contain my fear. Travis nodded, his face pale and terrified. We followed the voice, each step heavier than the last. The whispers guided us deeper into the cemetery until we reached an ancient oak tree, its gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. At its base lay a small clearing, and there, illuminated by the faint glow of the moon, we saw a figure. It was a woman, dressed in a tattered white gown, her long hair cascading over her shoulders. Sarah Reed stood before us, her eyes hollow and haunting, a smile on her lips that sent shivers down my spine. "Sarah," I breathed, stepping back instinctively. "Where's Luke?" She tilted her head, her smile widening. "He answered my call. He is with me now." "No," Travis shouted, desperation fueling his voice. "You can't take him. Let him go." Sarah's laughter echoed, chilling us to the bone. "He belongs to me, just as the others before him. They never leave." In that moment, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Behind her, I could make out shadows, figures trapped in the darkness, their faces twisted in fear. Yet they were the lost souls, the men who had answered her call and never returned. "Please," I cried, stepping forward. "Let him go. He didn't mean any harm." Sarah's expression shifted, a flicker of sadness crossing her features. "You think you can bargain with me? You think love will save him? He chose to come here." But then an idea sparked in my mind. "You wanted revenge," I said, my voice steadying. "You were betrayed. But Luke isn't like the others. He didn't hurt you. He was never part of that." Her eyes narrowed. and for a moment I thought I could see a hint of the woman she once was beneath the layers of grief and anger. "What do you know of betrayal?" she hissed. "I know what it's like to lose someone," I replied, desperation fueling my words. "But you're trapped in this pain. Let him go, and maybe you can find peace." The air crackled with tension as she regarded me, and I could feel the weight of the lost souls behind her, their despair palpable. "I can't leave them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They are my revenge, my only companions." "Then don't let them claim another," I urged. "Let him go, and you can finally be free." The silence stretched, and I could see her struggle. It was a moment of vulnerability, a fleeting chance to break the cycle of revenge that had bound her for so long. "Please," I said softly, "let us help you." Finally, she stepped back, her form flickering in the moonlight. "If you can find my true love and bring him to me, I will release him," she said, her voice trembling. "But until then, he is mine." With that, she vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of her sorrow behind. Travis and I stood frozen, the reality of our situation crashing down upon us. We had to find Luke, and we had to break Sarah's curse. In the days that followed, we searched everywhere for clues about Sarah's lost love. Yet we pored over town records, old diaries, and newspaper clippings, desperate to piece together the story that could save our friend. Finally, we uncovered a name. Thomas Reed. He had been Sarah's fiancé, the man who had abandoned her on the night of their wedding. But there was more to the story. As we dug deeper, we learned that he had lived in Ash Hollow until his untimely death shortly after Sarah's tragic end. Armed with this knowledge, we returned to the cemetery one last time, the moon high above us, illuminating our path. As we stood before the old oak tree, I called out, "Sarah, we know who your love was." Moments passed in tense silence before the air shimmered, and she appeared once more, her eyes filled with longing and sorrow. "Have you found him?" she asked, her voice laced with hope. "Yes," I replied, my heart racing. "His name was Thomas Reed. He loved you, but he was afraid. He wanted to be with you, but the pain of loss consumed him too. If you let Luke go, we will tell your story. We will make sure you're remembered." For a moment, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. The lost souls behind her remained silent, their fate intertwined with hers. "Tell me," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me he loved me." "He did," I said, my voice steady. "He loved you until the very end, and it's time for you to let go of the pain and find peace." Sarah's expression softened, and I could see the flicker of hope in her eyes. "Perhaps it is time to end this cycle." With a wave of her hand, the shadows surrounding the oak tree began to dissipate. The lost souls glanced at one another, their expressions shifting from despair to relief. And then, like a breath of fresh air, Luke stumbled into view, disoriented but alive. "Sarah," he whispered, looking at the specter before him. "Thank you." With a final nod, Sarah's form shimmered and began to fade. "Remember me, not as a ghost of vengeance, but as a woman in love. Goodbye." And just like that, she vanished into the night, leaving behind a lingering sense of peace. Travis and I embraced Luke, relief washing over us as we realized the curse had been lifted. The town of Ash Hollow could finally begin to heal. As we walked home, I thought back to the stories my grandma had told me by the fireplace. This one, too, would become part of the town's legacy, a reminder of love, loss, and the power of letting go. And now, as I pass the old cemetery on my way through Ash Hollow, I no longer feel fear. Instead, I feel gratitude for the lessons learned and the bonds forged in the face of darkness. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share the video. See you next time.